Hey everybody, and welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about no spoilers, but Git clone. So we're going to be talking about how do we actually get a repository that we're interested in off of GitHub and onto our local machine. How do we do that? How do we set that up? So it's a very straightforward process, luckily. So I'm just going to walk you through kind of what to do and what's happening in broad strokes here today, and then later on down the line we'll get more in depth on some of the jargon that's going to come up. But for right now, basically we have our local directory. So we just have the directories we already had from before. So we have Alice, Bob, and remote server. But we want to get this repository from GitHub onto our local machine. Now, there's not much going on here. It's just a README. But we still would like to have it for whatever reason. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use the git clone command. So first things first, as always, if we're wondering how we might use a command in Git, we'll want to just look at git help and then the command we're looking to use. So we can go ahead and do that. So the Git manual is an amazing resource. It tells us basically everything we need to know. And you can see here, it shows us, what git clone is doing, what different commands it does, everything that it's doing. Now, this is a great resource that is also available online in the Git documentation. And it's just about the same information. Actually, let me zoom in my terminal here a little bit so you guys can see better. So again, that was just git help clone. And that gave us the man page, so the manual page. Now, what are we going to use this for, right? So we talked before about one of the problems that Git solves, right? And that's this idea that, so we have in our local directory, we have this information, and if we want to share that information, we have to send these files to people or somehow get them the files. You can use services like Dropbox, which has full file versioning, so it's a great tool for that. My preferred method when I'm talking about something like code or things adjacent to code, I like to use GitHub. Now, the way that we can share these is by putting our resources on github.com. We're going to cover that in a few videos from now, but I just want to talk about how we actually get the information to our local machines. Because again, it's great that we can send files. It's cool that we can do that, but imagine there was an easier way. And imagine we could bring all of that version history with us. That we don't have to. We can. And that's one of the cool things about github.com. GitHub.com essentially is hosting a bunch of Git repositories, and it allows us to address them on the website by our username. So like, for instance, this is my GitHub, and I can just check out my repositories and look at it and say, oh, nice. So let's look at this Git good cloning. And, if I like this, I can now clone this repository, right? So GitHub.com is hosting all of these Git repositories that we can interact with, as long as they're public, of course, or if you're working for a company that hosts their code or some of their repositories on GitHub.com. You can also pull from or clone a private repository as well. So there are a lot of other things we could also do, to be clear, but right now we just want to talk about clone. So the problem we're solving today is that this code exists on the website. These files exist on the website, and we want them to exist in our local machine. So how do we do that, right? And it's with the git clone command. So, we already looked at some documentation. That documentation will tell us how we can use this. a lot of awesome different flags we can use to modify how the command works. You know, we're not going to go too deep into these flags today. We will talk a little bit about specifying the directory that we are cloning the github.com repository to. But yeah, for the most part, it's a very straightforward process. So how do we do it, right? I've been rambling for 5.5 minutes. How do we actually clone this thing? So first of all, we can click on code, the green code button. And because we've already set up SSH, if you hadn't, check out that video. But because we've already set up SSH, we're going to use the SSH address. So we can click it here, and then we can click the copy button to copy that into our clipboard. And then we can come over to our terminal. I'll just clear the screen so we can be sure to see. And we can paste that information into our terminal. So you see here that we have this git clone, and then we have an address. This is an SSH address, which we can see from this colon here that separates the remote server and then, you know, what we're accessing on the remote server. So basically this is saying, hey, we want to clone the repository located at this address on GitHub. Now, really quickly, and brushing over a lot of the more important details for a second, we're coming into an interesting point, which is that there's kind of these two different places where your repositories can live, right? You have your local version, which we understand. It's a folder, right? And let's just run this command to see what happens, and we can look at, you know, what it is. So cloning into get good cloning, enumerating objects, a fun way of saying counting stuff, separating it out into jobs. And then we are counting the objects, we are compressing the objects, we are receiving the objects, and then we are done. Cool stuff. So what does that look like? When we ls now, you can see we have this get good cloning. That's pretty cool. So let's hop into there using the cd command. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Awesome. And my specific terminal tells us we're in a repository with this additional, you know, information on the command line. But let's just take a peek at our git status. We can see on branch main, your branch is up to date with origin main. Nothing to commit, working tree clean. Okay. Let's see what files are here. Yes, the README. Okay, well, let's see what's in the README. We're going to use Nano today instead of VI because I think the user interface is just a little bit more straightforward. Though later on down the road, I'll talk about Vim and VI and how we can use those tools to great effect. But for right now, we're just going to keep it at Nano because it is it's a little bit more straightforward to use if you're coming from a non-terminal background. So we can see here, get good at cloning. First, let's define what cloning repository. Well, this is just perfect. This is exactly the README we had, right? Well, let's see the commits that we have. So we have two different commits with two different hashes. Okay, so let's exit out of this file on our terminal, and we can do that with Control X in Nano. And let's see the git log. Let's see if these match up. And indeed, yes, they do. So you can see here that we have the same two commits with the same two hashes. And incredible, right? That's all it took. It was one line of code. So we press Q to escape that particular git log. If you ever get trapped there, just remember it's Q for quit. So now we can talk about those two different things, right? We have our local repository now. It's awesome. All this stuff is here. You know, we have our git status. We can see it. You know, we already checked that the README was there, and it was. So that's our local repository. Now this github.com web address that we're seeing. So the repository here is our remote repository. Now you're going to hear this term come up a lot when you're using the Git tool, remote and local, right? So local means on our machine, on our computer. It means the things that we have that you can browse in File Explorer and see, right? It means, this is just my computer, right? So if you see here, we still have Alice, Bob, Get Good Cloning, remote server, everything's awesome. But the remote repository refers to this information on github.com. Now, it's not always going to refer to a repository on github.com, but a lot of the time when we're talking about remote repositories, we mean hosted somewhere that isn't our machine, right? And for a lot of cases, that's going to be github.com. Now, one of the special things about GitHub that we haven't really got a chance to get deep into, and we will over the course of the next, few videos here, is this idea that every place has its own repository with Git. So this repository is separate to this repository, right? So even though I cloned this repository and I got all this stuff, they're not connected in a way that, like, if I make a change here, it will automatically be reflected here. And we can showcase that really quickly by just saying something like, let's use the touch command to add a local feature. And we'll just make it a Python file for fun. So the touch command just creates a file, and then we're calling that file localfeature.py. And you can see now when we ls, so we look at the files that we have here, we have this local feature, right? Localfeature.py. So it's in our repository, right? If we were to ls and look at hidden files, we would see .git. So this is a repository, right? If we run git status, we're on branch main. Our branch is up to date with origin main, and we have this untracked file, right? We talked about untracked last time. Git, the record keeper, that is the Git history, doesn't know about this file yet. And so when we look at the website, there's no feature here. Even though we definitely have it locally, localfeature.py, there's no feature here, right? And so that's one of the important things to realize about GitHub quickly, is that everywhere has their own repository. And there's lots of, Git is built to sync those repositories up very well and transfer information between them, and it's an astounding tool at doing that. But none of that is happening automatically. This is all happening through usage of commands, where we're talking about the CLI tool. Now, there are other tools that we'll talk about in some tool deep dives that, reflect the fact that this is a manual process, and so they've made it more automated. But for right now, it's important to remember when we make changes locally, those changes don't appear remotely without some manual intervention. And it's the same thing opposite, right? If I add a new file and I call this remote feature.py, for instance, and I just have it be like import OS, if name, if dunder name equals dunder main, pass. Don't write code like this, obviously, but just to show you that we can create a file and we can commit that file here. So this is the same thing that we do in the local environment. We're adding this file, and now we're going to commit it to the history. So we can do that and say, hey, all we did was added remote feature.py, added a sweet remote feature that passes. And then we can click this green commit button. We're going to talk more about what I'm doing there in the future, but for right now, We just want to get this file here, and we can see it, remote feature.py. Now, when I look at my repository here, even though we're still in, this is a repository, we still have our .git, and when we do git status, we still have our, we can still see that this is a repository. We don't see in our ls that remote feature, and we don't see that we're behind, right? So again, the key information here is this Git system has two different repositories. There's our local repository and there's our remote repository. And though there's a lot of tools to sync these to each other and update each other, and all that's handled elegantly through few simple commands, it doesn't actually translate until we ask it to. So even if we were to do what we practiced or do what we learned about the last time we were talking about git add, even if we git add that local feature.py, and then we do a git commit, and we say added a sweet new local feature, right? Even though it's committed now, and if I go to git log, I can see added a sweet new local feature here, right? When I refresh that remote repository, we don't see that change reflected yet. So that's an important piece of the Git puzzle, is that each location has their own fully functional, separate repository. That is a very powerful feature, as we'll come to learn why as we continue down this Git road. But it is a very powerful feature. It is a little bit confusing, right? There's a little bit more mental overhead when we're thinking about our Git repositories, right? Because you might assume, oh, well, they're attached, so they must be the same. And so tomorrow we're going to talk about remotes, literally. So right now this is a remote repository, yes, but there are these in Git. Just to spoil it a little bit, we have this idea of remote branches and tracking branches. We're going to talk about that more tomorrow, very in depth, because it's kind of one of the core principles Git is built upon. But for right now, what's important to understand is that even though we've cloned this repository, which means we've copied it, we only copied it from its most recent screen or snapshot, right? So like we talked about before with the when we make a commit or we add a file, until we tell the record keeper about that, they have no idea, right, that file exists. And so we only got the most recent snapshot from github.com when we cloned it. So we don't get the new information. And the same way, what we do on our local machine doesn't reflect in the remote until we tell it to. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to show you really quickly is that we don't have to clone into the directory that we're sitting in. So in Unix systems, the directory we are currently in is called the present working directory, or PWD. If we use the command pwd, it will tell us exactly what that directory is. When we run the git clone command, if we say I wanted to attempt to reclone that that remote repo, right? It's had some changes made to it. I want to reclone it. Now, there's better ways to do this, as we'll discuss coming up, but let's just say naively I want to do that, right? First of all, if I try to do that in the present working directory we're in, we're not going to be allowed to, right? Because Git good cloning already exists. You'll notice, though, because we didn't specify any directory after we indicated what repository we wanted to clone, Git assumed we wanted to use the present working directory. Now, again, we don't have to do that. We can do something like git clone. Now I'm just going to paste the address in there this time. And let's say we want to do that in projects, and we wanted to put that in Git examples, And let's say we wanted to put that into a repository called Git Good cloning, V1, the old V1 trick, right? So we can go ahead and do that. And now you'll notice that we have this repository or this directory called Git Good cloning V1. And if we go ahead and cd into that, so change directory into that, you'll notice two things. First of all, this is indeed a repository. And second of all, it does have that remote feature we added since we've cloned it after we added and committed the file on the remote, right? So again, we don't want to do this pattern necessarily. GitHub has more elegant ways to do this, but it is possible to just clone all the new changes, right? So anytime a change happens, you can just clone it. You'll also notice that if we look at our Git log, we have that that commit that we made that added that remote feature along with the comments that we made when we added it. So all that to say, the idea of Git clone is fantastic. It's a great one. At some point in the future, we'll do a thorough deep dive on what all these flags do and what they mean, why we might use them. But for right now, we're going to leave it there because, again, it's quite a long video. So I just wanted to thank you guys again for watching if you made it this far. And I'm going to keep making these videos. Again, I know we're going very, at a rather slow pace, but I do think that it's worth it, and it will be worth it in the end because we'll have a much better intuitive understanding of the Git tool as well as how it interacts with GitHub.com. So yeah, thank you very much. Have a great day, and we will see you next time.